Photographing a wedding with a drone. What are the legal implications for doing so, either yourself or hiring someone to do it for you? All that today on the show.
This is the Wedding Industry Law Podcast, a podcast dedicated to wedding professionals that are just trying to keep it legal. And now, your host, Rob Shank.
Hey out there, welcome back to the show. My name is Rob. I will be your host for this most excellent episode. We are talking about operating a drone at a wedding to video record or photograph that wedding. We all know the horror stories behind this. Somebody gets smacked in the head. It ends up in the punch bowl. What are the serious legal implications of having a drone at a wedding? Not just from a negligent standpoint, but from a regulatory standpoint, because these are aircrafts, by the way. But we're not doing that alone. This week we have probably the most famous drone lawyer in the country. That's right. You got wedding industry lawyers, wedding lawyers. You also have drone lawyers. And luckily we snagged the drone lawyer, Jonathan Rupprecht. Jonathan is an attorney and is currently a contributor at Forbes.com for aerospace and defense. He was an adjunct faculty at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University for their Unmanned Systems Legal and Regulatory Compliance course. Jonathan's made numerous media appearances. We're talking about New York Times, Politico, Forbes, etc. on the topic of drones as the drone attorney. His legal analysis of drones has been sought after by major media networks and drone industry specific media. Not only have the networks reached out to him for his analysis, they have cited his legal works when reporting on major drone related stories. Straight to the horse's mouth on this one. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
I gotta give a shout out to any attorney out there that has an area of expertise that is kind of in a niche of a niche of a niche. And you are, if I'm not mistaken, basically the drone lawyer in the country. Like if you type in drone law, anything, you're coming up. So congratulations on that. Great marketing.
Well, thank you. Well, that's actually my friend taught me how to do SEO, so that's actually how that happened.
Right. I think that's the story of many lawyers with those type of niches, but no, I feel you on that one. But you have, and I just want to make sure that right off the top of the bat for the benefit of the audience, Jonathan's website, which I will have in the show notes, is a plethora of information and knowledge about everything regarding using drones at an event or not an event that you would ever want to know about. Everything from, FCC guidelines, aviation laws, liability laws. We'll get into some of this stuff in the show, but to the extent that we don't get into something that you want to know about, please, by all means, go to Jonathan's website. So, okay, enough of that. Let's get that out of the way. All right, Jonathan. So as you know, this show is about wedding industry professionals doing their thing. One of those things is to photograph or record weddings with a drone. Now, you are the drone lawyer. We've already established that's on the record. What, in your mind, in your experience, is one of the main legal issues with using a drone at a wedding?
I mean, your big one is some type of negligence lawsuit coming after you. I mean, and that can be broken down in a couple attack vectors there and that is one, negligent hiring. You hired an illegal operator who was flying outside of the regulations. There's also where the individual was flying in a reckless manner. You had a duty to stop him, or your staff saw that, and you didn't stop it, and then ended up crashing into somebody. And so there's been actually some cases that have happened over the last couple of years where somebody will bring in a drone operator for some reason. So I know you're focusing primarily on the wedding venue situation, but if we kind of like scope it out in regards to just more like drones coming into a venue of some sort, like a hotel of some sort, and then there is some type of wreck. There's been quite a few lawsuits that have happened on that. There's Searless Castle that happened up in, I think it was New Hampshire, Vermont. There was Caesar's Palace, which broke in a drone light show, and that ended up actually resulting in a lady losing her eye. I mean, your typical scenario of what happens after the crash happens. It's actually the weird part is actually a lot of women get hit in the head. It's a weird statistic. Women get hit in the head seems like way more than men with the drones when they fall, and a lot of eye injuries where they actually lose the eye. So you can actually have kind of a serious injury there. So that's kind of what happens there. An overall typical flavor of situations.
I don't even want to step into that whole can of worms about why women are getting hit by these things at a higher rate than men. I would assume then, based on my experiences, because the men are the morons actually using the drone, and it's just the woman that happens to be the bystander. But we'll leave that to another episode. So if I understand you correctly, then what we're talking about, one of the main things that you got to worry about if you are either using the drone or you're hiring somebody as a contractor or an employee to use a drone, is hurting somebody with it, like literally the thing hitting somebody in, across the dome. So the first thing that I heard you is that kind of like opening that up is that you, the wedding professional, could potentially be liable for hiring somebody that is not operating within regulations, and I'm using regulations in air quotes. What does that mean? We'll get into the bodily injury component here in a second, but what is the regulations that you were talking about?
Sure. Yeah. So the idea of hiring someone who isn't properly approved has come up in multiple different ways and scenarios. You have where that was actually alleged as one of the causes of action against the Caesar's Palace case, that the individual that was actually coming in did not have the proper waivers to actually operate at night in a swarm. He actually did. Basically, the personal injury attorney didn't really know exactly how to check for that. And we can get into a second here because there's kind of like two sides of that coin. There's the what happens if you hired someone and it did crash, but also just the fact of the matter, like how do you actually practically check to make sure the guy's a legit drone operator so you don't look stupid in case anybody does ask, right? And so the idea of you didn't hire an individual who is a licensed, a remote pilot certificated individual, okay? Some people might call it a pilot's license. Technical term is it's a remote pilot certificate. That individual has to be certificated as well as have current knowledge. So anytime you're dealing with someone who's flying commercially, then you're going to want to check to make sure they have a remote pilot certificate, that they have a current aeronautical knowledge exam. And so you want to check for both of those things. The aircraft must be registered. And then if they're flying over people or at night, then they have to have appropriate waivers or flying in accord with the regulations. And night and over people, by the way, those regulations are all potentially about to change maybe next month. So this is a constant, ever evolving area. It's like, you want a different answer? Talk to me tomorrow. I might give you a different answer. It's perpetually just evolving. And so the pilot has to be certificated, the aircraft has to be registered, and for certain types of operations of flying directly over people, you need to have a waiver or fly according to the regulations. At night, you need to have a waiver or fly according to the regulations. And that's kind of like the major high-level points there that you need to kind of be aware of from hiring to kind of preclude a negligent hiring lawsuit. And so if you need to actually find out if a person has a certain type of waiver, you can go to the FAA's website and just type in 107 waivers granted and look up that person's name to see if they actually have that waiver. Because there have been some instances where people have actually sold jobs. There's actually a case going on right now in the Western District Court of Texas where an individual basically photoshopped a certificate of insurance and a waiver and sent over some pilot certificates from other people and ended up actually getting the job from, I think it was SeaWorld, and took all the money. I forgot it was $20,000-$30,000 and ended up not performing the job. So they just fudged it all. At least you can third-party verify a waiver. via the FAA's website. And if you need to check out whether a certificate is actually legit or active, you can go to the FAA's website as well, and also look up like Airman Registry and type in their information. You can see whether or not they actually have a certificate. The ability to check whether a person has a current knowledge exam, you can't do that. You're just gonna have to call over. And for a certificate of insurance, if they send you one, you're gonna have to call over to the insurance company to make sure it's valid and not Photoshop, because there have been instances where individuals in the drone industry have been creative with their Photoshopping skills, much more so than their getting legit paperwork skills.
Right. So so a couple of things with this is that, number one, you keep saying FAA. So if I understand correctly, at least at this point in time, and things might change depending on the administration, but drones, to at least some extent, are regulated by the federal government, right?
Correct. Yeah. If it's flying in the national airspace and it is an aircraft, then it is regulated. And you have kind of two different categories. You have recreational aircraft and then non-recreational aircraft. So when we say kind of commercial, that's going to fall into the non-recreational category. So like nonprofits, the fire departments, and commercial entities are all going to fall into that. There's a certain set of regulations there called Part 107. So 14 CFR Part 107 is where pretty much people operate under for commercial wedding photography and all of that.
Okay, so there is if you are operating a drone for money to shoot a wedding, then you are more than likely falling under a federal regulation that you need to abide by. I guess that.
Correct. Yeah, Part 107. Right. Exactly. So, I mean, the two biggest ones there, regulations. Well, actually three for wedding photography. One, are you flying at night? Because sometimes these night weddings go out later on at night. Currently, you need to have a night waiver to go and do that for sometime maybe here in the next month or two. There is a whole new set of regulations that are going to potentially be published, and that will allow for night flying without a waiver. So just kind of throwing that out there. Currently, you need a waiver, but that's probably going to change. The FAA is trying to get out of granting these waivers. They're trying to do it by rule, not by waiver. And for over people, that's also potentially coming out sometime in the next month or two. And there's going to be a lot of fluctuation there on who has actually been approved, which aircraft are approved for that. But currently, there are probably like 50 or so entities in the entire United States that actually have over people approvals. So they could actually do wedding photography and fly over the crowd of people, provided that they fly according to the restrictions in their waiver. So they're out there. There's not too many of them. You can check on the FAA's website to see if actually it's up there. It is legit. And so those are the over people and night, and kind of like the cousin to the over people prohibition, because you can't fly over people unless you give the approval, is you cannot fly in such a way as to cause an undue hazard to people and property on the surface. And so think of it kind of a little bit broader than don't fly over people. It's don't fly in such a way that you cause a hazard to people for like a loss of control for any reason. And that's a potential problem for wedding venue guests and stuff like that. If there's a propeller that is breaks in mid-flight or is thrown and the autopilot cannot correct for that, or if there's a motor failure or LiPo battery failure, some mechanical reason that the aircraft actually came out of the sky and it actually crashed into somebody. That is a potential problem there, because when it says you cannot cause any undue hazard for any reason, and that's a very broad regulation.
Yeah, sounds like
and you don't really want to be defending that, because if you say, oh, but something unforeseeable happened, it's like, well, the reg just said anything reason. Well, yeah, I'm so a butterfly, or I don't know, whatever. Yeah. Some guy throwing a towel at it. It's like, well, you were supposed to fly in such a way as to not cause an undue hazard. Now there's another discussion on what is an undue hazard versus just a hazard, right? Because the undue hazardness is kind of like did you exacerbate the hazard somehow in such a way? So maybe you were flying so fast in a circle that if anything were to happen, it was going to go way out and crash into a crowd of people, right? You're based upon your trajectory or something you were flying. So you exacerbated it more than it being a hazard in and of itself.
Right. So, and so just to take one step back from that, these regulations are going to apply to you, talking about the wedding professional, regardless of whether your drone was purchased at Walmart for $35 or if it looks like the drone that, killed Osama bin Laden or something. You know what I'm saying? Like just because you got your drone on Amazon doesn't mean that you're exempt from these regulations. Is that a good characterization?
Yeah, that's a great point. So, I mean, the size where you purchase it is not really going to be a very big factor in regards to the commercialness of it's your operation, and it's an aircraft. There you go. Boom.
There you go.
Part 107, and it's simple. So if you pretty much everything that everyone's flying out there, like the Mavics, the Phantoms from DJI or elsewhere, those are all going to be considered definitely in that category. If you are for purposes of commercial, right, flying. So the FAA is not really looking so much at the aircraft. It's primarily the intention of the flight, and you're using an aircraft. So it's kind of a weirder way to look at it. It's small unmanned aircraft as a whole are there's like, I think, a broad category. So you could have like a helicopter, a fixed wing, little model aircraft. You could have a little hot air balloon. All these,
yeah.
It's a concept, and if you are using that aircraft for purposes of some type of benefit, commercial or whatever, even if you're doing it for free, because what happens is people go, well, what if I fly for free? Is that like commercial and not commercial? Because
right.
For some reason they always have that accent. Anyways, but the right, but the big issue there is whether or not you're receiving any type of benefit. So the FAA's interpretation on that of commercial is really any benefit from that flight. If you're doing it like to put on the news, so you can say like, hey, or this was done by so and so, right? Or throw it up on Instagram, then everyone's going to say, oh wow, that guy's awesome. You're using it for marketing material, so it's not really for non-commercial recreational purposes, right? You're really doing it because your end goal is to actually get a paid gig, right? You're not flying purely for fun. You're
right.
trying to get, so that's kind of how the FAA looks at it. It's what's your end goal? What's the purpose of the flight? And then the flip side of that is some people go, oh, well, I was doing it for free, recreational, 100%, put my hand on the Bible and say that. But then I now realize I can sell that. And so then my advice to those people would be like, look, you just look like a guy who was trying to do it commercially originally, and God may believe you, but the FAA won't. And I try not to look like a guy who's trying to get around the law. That's really what it boils down to.
Exactly. So this all makes sense. I mean, like we're talking about, it typically is not going to matter what kind of drone you're doing. It's not going to matter whether you're saying that if you're doing it at a wedding, you're getting money for it. Sometimes it doesn't matter if you're getting money for it. You're probably falling under the guidelines. Now, let's say this. Let's talk about liability with regard to if you're the planner or the coordinator or the venue owner and you've hired a contractor and somebody gets hurt. Like we talked off air about a particular case in which different people were named as defendants. Can you kind of walk us through how somebody that may or may not be, I'm not the one with the remote control. Why am I getting sued? Can you kind of walk us through that concept?
Yeah. So going to that, one is, hey, negligent hiring. You hired a guy who didn't have his remote pilot certificate, and in order to obtain his remote pilot certificate, he had to take a test, which demonstrated that individual had knowledge and skill on how to operate his aircraft safely, right? So there's kind of an aspect of where you don't hire a guy who has a certificate. That is not a good position to be in regards to defending that type of lawsuit, right? If that guy ended up crashing, right? Because it's like, well, you could have asked him for his remote pilot certificate. You could have gone to the airman registry database and just quickly thrown his name and number in there just to check if he actually, passed it, actually has it. So that's one thing there. If the individual is, operating according to his waiver or says he is, right, read over the waiver to actually make sure he's flying according to it. And also read over Part 107, just skim through it, see if he's doing everything he says he's doing, because sometimes what people will do is, they'll fly too low or too close to people. And then that's where the discussion of, well, you might have hired a legit guy. He looked legit, but as things started progressing and how he was operating his aircraft, it looked like at that point you were now on notice, he was flying in a careless and reckless way and could potentially have injured some of your patrons. And so then now therefore, you and your staff had a duty to intervene and stop that operation, and you didn't, and somebody got hurt. And that was one of the arguments up in it's New Hampshire, Vermont. There's a Searless Castle case up there where it was at a wedding of all things, right? And they actually sued the wedding event planner because of that, saying, yeah, your guys saw him flying in such a way, and you guys didn't stop him. He crashed into some lady's head. It's always the lady getting hit in the head, and something, and you are liable for all the damage. That also happened in. There's another case down in there's a fraternity down in University of Southern California. Kind of similar scenario happened where there was an event planner that they were putting on some like big party, and they hired a drone operator, and the drone operator crashed into a crowd of people, hits the lady in the head, right? And so they were like, hey, you should have stopped it. It's flying over a crowd of people, probably not safe. If you had a waiver to do that because you have special aircraft or special mitigations, okay, but yeah, you should have intervened. Flying over people is not really typically the safest kind of thing to do.
Right. And okay, so let me ask this. This might be off of your area, so it's all good if we don't get to the bottom of this. But it's my understanding typically that if I'm a company and I hire an independent contractor, that independent contractor is responsible for their own negligence. In those cases in which both the hiring company and the drone operator, theoretically as an independent contractor, were both sued, was there not a defense made that that's the responsibility of the drone operator and not me?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's definitely outside of my realm in regards to dealing with every state. I'm just telling you, based upon the complaints that I have actually read in all these lawsuits, those were the first things that were getting thrown out of the gate by the person, right? So then then yeah, great. If you're in that particular state you're in, yeah, that would be awesome if you could allege that, saying, there's a complete liability there, right. Or something somehow limited in some way based upon that. But multiple states that was a common theme, that they were all the personal injury attorneys were all alleging that there was some facts going on there. Your staff knew about it, and you guys didn't intervene based upon those negligent, reckless type of operations. And that gets interesting there. Like, hey, how do you know it's careless and reckless? Two quick things: flying over a crowd of people, flying really close to people. There you go. Those are two. You can kind of go, yeah, that's kind of reckless. When you're kind of leaving those two scenarios, then it kind of gets a little bit more up in the air, and it gets kind of questionable as to like, well, did you really have a duty to kind of like intervene or something there? So in one case, the drone kind of went out of control and crashed into the lady and hit her in the eye, the Caesar's Palace case. But was that drone sufficiently kind of away from it based upon just like a normal human being just observing it? Would it look and appear to be careless and reckless, right? So, you know what I'm saying? You can't really, like, from the observation of the aircraft, determine that it's going to have some type of mechanical failure or some animal or bird is going to interact with it and cause some series of events to happen, right?
So I guess at the end of the day, the recommendations that you would have for a wedding professional, if they're going to hire a drone operator, is to, number one, make sure they have the proper license and certificates in your state, that they seem legit, and as they're operating the drone, that at least, not all of us are experts at drone aviation, but if the thing, seems to have smoke coming from it, it's bouncing off the walls, and, maybe you should put the kibosh on that. So I guess that's kind of like takeaway.
Right. Yeah. So, you can do a lot of front work in regards to just trying to make sure that the pilot is properly certificated, the aircraft registered, everybody is applying according to the regulations based upon your, understanding of them. And the waiver, they're flying at night or over people, that they have that appropriate approval. And then you can only do kind of so much, right? Well, make sure that they have insurance, right? Maybe ask for a certificate of insurance, but in at least one case we know of that, and there's lots of anecdotal evidence that I have that where people will Photoshop that. So you should probably also do your due diligence and call over to the insurance company or make sure that actually is a legit certificate of insurance. And additionally, maybe you should just purchase your own non-owned aircraft insurance. So if you're hiring somebody and their insurance doesn't properly cover them for that flight, then you would have your own insurance to protect you in case of their negligence. The situations that this might pop up would be that individual had the drone A insured, okay, and maybe a couple of days before the flight, crashed drone A, didn't tell you, bought drone B, and drone B wasn't insured.
Oh, wow.
Well, you had your own because there's different policies on how you can insure the operation or insure the aircraft. There's annual policies, there's hourly policies, monthly policies. There's different ways to do insurance there. But if you have a non-owned insurance policy, then you can kind of fall back in case something happened, right? Somebody's flying the wrong aircraft, or they potentially maybe lied on their application, right? And insurance is going to deny it. So that's another aspect as well.
Like,
right?
I feel like this is, a new world we live in. It's like the Jetsons, man. Uninsured aviation insurance, like for drones. That's amazing to me that there are people out there writing those policies. I would never have imagined that in a million years, that even if I don't own a drone, I can buy insurance that covers me if somebody that I hire has a drone and for whatever reasons you mentioned messes something up, I'm covered. That's amazing.
Right. Yeah. So that's something I would recommend. I mean, you can also try to be named as an insured on the person's insurance policy, but you want to read carefully whether or not that by being named insured, that'll potentially get you knocked out of coverage. That's a tricky little area, right? Sometimes by getting named insured, you end up shooting yourself in the foot. You just really want coverage. So you got to kind of look at that, because are you providing the photography services, or is the remote pilot, right? Because then anyways, there's weird ways that insurance companies, how that's actually drafted, you could potentially shoot yourself in the foot by becoming named insured. And sometimes you just want to purchase the non-owned aircraft insurance. And so, right, they could have purchased an hourly, monthly, or annual policy, and then basically got enough to get the job going, since you have the certificate of insurance. Then after that, cancel the insurance, or could have stop payment on the second installment for the insurance, right? And so they didn't notify you of that. Something you can also do there is sometimes you can reach out to the insurance company in regards to purchasing there's some stuff you can do in regards to purchasing notification, whether or not, if the policy is canceled, that the insurance company will notify you. So there's clever, creative ways to kind of protect yourself if you are hiring a drone photographer for your venue, or right, because there's the hotel venue aspect to it. There's also the planner aspect to it, and sometimes it's could all be one and the same, or just two parties, or maybe they're hiring a complete third party that is the pilot, and so it kind of gets a little complicated there to see who's covered and who's not, and make sure you don't have any indemnification provisions. You want the indemnification provisions, but you don't want to sign anyone else.
You don't want to be.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you want to have.
I ain't signing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it when people sign it for me, but I don't like doing it to other people. Nope.
Well, Jonathan, this has been a ton of information, useful information. If somebody actually wants to learn more, they can go to your website. But if they wanted to contact you, do you help people with regards to this type of stuff?
Sure. Yeah. If you're wanting to find me, you can go to Google, just type in drone attorney or drone lawyer, and I'll probably pop up pretty quick, or type in Rupprecht Law and you'll find me pretty quickly on Google. And regarding help, I've done criminal defense, civil enforcement defense, because people do get in trouble flying their drones in such a way as that, the FAA, not the FAA, but the local state law enforcement and stuff will actually come after people. And at certain times in certain places you don't want to be flying, such as like around the football games and stuff. The Department of Justice has actually been a little bit more active in regards to going after people and charging them with the federal misdemeanors and prosecuting them for flying their drones near temporary flight restrictions near like football games and stuff like that. So what you don't know can hurt you sometimes.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge with us.
Oh yeah, yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I certainly hope that you found this episode as interesting as I did. I geek out whenever I am in the presence of another lawyer that has a super particular speciality. So that's kind of fun when our paths kind of cross. But if you enjoyed the content, then please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Go over to YouTube, Wedding Industry Law. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Leave a comment. If you've got a suggestion for content, let me know. I will be more than happy to address it in a future episode. New episodes every Monday in the morning sometime. Start your workday right with the Wedding Industry Law podcast. With that, folks, we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Wedding Industry Law podcast. This podcast is intended for general information only. Nothing in this podcast is intended to be legal advice. Do not rely on this podcast for your legal matter. Instead, consult an attorney in your area. Thanks, obrigada, até semana que vem.